Welcome today to our second session of Supporting Success. To my left, I've got Jenny Reardon from GatekeeperHR, and I've got Elaine Abbs to my right, who is the employment solicitor at Rix & Kay. And myself, Cam Despagnac, I am the associate director at Gerrard Consulting, and I do recruitment.
So today's session, we're going to be covering 4 different topics. Firstly, artificial intelligence and HR and recruitment. We'll also look at performance management. We'll then go on to have a discussion about the new legislation that's coming into effect on sexual harassment in the workplace. And finally, we'll look at the new code of practice on fire and rehire that is quite topical at the moment. So, as we're aware, AI is a really hot topic at the moment and is having significant impact across many sectors of business. From your perspective, in terms of recruitment, Cam, how is that impacting on either yourselves or your clients in terms of dealing with recruitment?
It is such a massive thing, and I think it's only going to get bigger, to be honest. We're finding that some companies are using it more than others. There was a recent BBC report that came out that something like 42% of all of the UK's tech companies are using AI in order to screen candidates, and that's huge. For us, we have got various different systems that we have in place in terms of attracting staff, screening, the initial interview process, and then, dealing with everybody's data as well. Writing adverts is something massive as well. So for us, we've got a system which is in place which can identify gender bias, which can be really useful in writing adverts. But also, in terms of AI, as I say, attracting candidates, through LinkedIn messages that we're using to attract candidates. So I think there's a lot of elements that can be used, successfully. And the impact, as I say, is going. You've got to accept it. It's coming, and it's here to stay, as you say. So on the flip of that, for you guys, on the employment side and the HR side, what are your thoughts on it?
I think, like with most new things or relatively new things that come into play, there are positives and negatives. I certainly think the positives are things like sort of the rote tasks that maybe employees don't particularly like doing could be absorbed by AI.
Yeah.
Things like performance management data that can easily be extracted by AI. So, but I think the key is to ensure that employees are aware as to how your business are going to use AI and what impact that will have on them, and ensure that they are consulted with, because there's lots of information out there that would suggest that there could potentially be a considerable shrinkage of the workforce. A Goldman Sachs report only last year said that 300 million jobs could potentially be lost, and GDP would still increase by over 7%. So, it's those sorts of stats that employees are likely to hear and be concerned about, understandably. So it's very much about consulting employees about AI, how your individual business is planning on using it, whether you are going to use it at all, because there will be some businesses where it's not appropriate to do so. But certainly there are cost efficiencies. Employers will be looking to reduce costs by giving certain tasks over to AI.
Yeah. And what about on the employment side of things? Because I think, AI is as fantastic as it is, but obviously AI learns from data that it's already received. So in terms of like discrimination and things like that, what are your thoughts on the use of AI and the potentials for discriminating in, the recruitment process?
So the current discrimination protection in the UK is within the Equality Act 2010, and that act hasn't got anything in it about artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence. The Equality Act provides that no one should be disadvantaged on the basis of whatever protected characteristic they have. And there's a new bill that was introduced in March this year, which is the Private Members Bill, to bring the first legislation in to regulate the use of AI in employment. The government itself is planning to bring in legislation on the use of AI, and any new legislation that comes in would have to include an amendment to the Equality Act, so that discrimination legislation can take into account how AI might potentially have an impact. Because as we all know, any sort of automated systems that are designed and the algorithms that are designed, there's been some really interesting and sort of worrying cases about the use of AI in decision making from employers, which can have discriminatory outcomes.
An interesting case recently, or 2018, with Uber Eats, where one of its employees won a discrimination case because he was ethnic minority, and the AI system that allowed him to have a facial recognition on his phone that made him, or allowed him to be paid and record his time whilst he was working for Uber Eats, wasn't actually working. It kept locking him out. So they dismissed him on the basis that he was being constantly locked out, and he took them to court and won a case for discrimination because actually it was as a result of the AI process that he was having difficulty. So it's certainly something that, again, as we sort of amalgamate AI into our businesses, we need to be very aware of and careful about.
The government is going to, well, the previous government, or existing government until the end of the election, is going to make its own legislation rather than relying on the Private Members Bill that I mentioned before. But its view before the election was called was that because the technology, AI technology, is still being developed, and it's not at a stage where the UK government could then bring legislation into place, because it would be potentially subject to change once the technology advances. So that just leaves employers at the moment and employees in a state of, I would say, not the Wild West, because we have the guidance from the Information Commissioner's Office on the UK data protection legislation, and of course that is brings in so many safeguards to do with employees and the use of their personal data. So we do already have the Data Protection Act, which has significant protections for the use of data, personal data in employment, and that will contain some safeguards in regard to discrimination, ensuring the fair use of employee and worker data in employment.
And certainly if an employer has, well, all employers will have a privacy notice or data protection policy. They should ensure, if they start using AI within their business, to incorporate that into the policy and make sure employees are aware.
The Information Commissioner's Office has got some excellent guidance on its website on AI, so we'd encourage everybody who employs anybody to have a look at that.
Yeah, I mean, I recently saw something that the SSR did a research study, and they found that with larger companies, like 250 plus employees, that they tend to have applicant tracking systems for their recruitment, but only 20% of SMEs have got that. And I think, ATSs are big financial outlays for businesses. So I thought maybe let's just have a chat about that. What do you think are the reasons why perhaps smaller businesses aren't using it as much, or why are not more of the bigger companies using them?
Well, I think firstly it'll be cost.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously as AI becomes embedded in businesses over the years, that cost I'm sure will go down, and so eventually I'm sure SMEs will look at taking up more AI. But I suppose it's also about the volume of recruitment.
Yeah.
Again, the outlay against the actual usage of that piece of kit.
Yeah.
If they're only recruiting a dozen people a year, it's just not financially viable.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that is something that they will be considering.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on from AI onto performance management, Jenny, can you just talk to us about the importance of performance management?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, every business, regardless of what sector, is about achieving its overall objectives. And in order to do so, if you've got employees, you need them to assist you in doing that. So it's really important to have some form of performance management system that helps you maximise the performance that you get from your employees. Clearly, it gives them an understanding of what the organisation is trying to achieve, and equally important as to what contribution they can make in order to achieve that. So, it is really important that performance management is an integral part of your business. What shape that takes will very much depend on each individual business. It's not a case of one size fits all. There are businesses who will do annual reviews. There are other businesses who will do quarterly reviews. Others that will just do sort of informal check-ins on a regular basis. And as I say, I don't think one size fits all, but it is important for all businesses to have something in place that allows that very important two-way communication to be clear between employer and employee.
And sorry to interrupt, but do you think that if an employee wants to be promoted and developed, that the managers should ensure that they encourage people to talk about that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
I can see people leaving if they're not managed.
And very often it's about managing those expectations, being aware as to what somebody's career development or aspirations are, but equally from a business perspective, understanding how you might meet those expectations. And also, to be fair, if you're not able to meet those expectations, being clear about that. So it's a really important two-way conversation that needs to be had, that will develop your employees and ultimately will help your business achieve its goals. So as I say, it's a really important part of any HR.
Most businesses have goal settings, don't they, these days, and things are monitored on a monthly basis across many sectors.
I'm noticing at the moment that a lot of my clients are starting to want their staff back into the office a bit more, but then from a candidate point of view, a lot of them are still looking for that flexibility of either hybrid working or remote working. It still seems to be quite a high up on priority list. So from a performance management point of view, if you have got people working off-site, remotely, hybrid, however you want to term it and however it works, do you think there's a different way of having to do that from somebody that's working in the office all the time?
Again, it's very difficult to be sort of generic about it. It again will depend on the employee, it will depend on the types of business. I think one thing that employers who have employees working remotely need to just think about is that very often you will have fewer touch points. So the very fact that they are working remotely means that you're not maybe seeing them on such a regular basis. So it's important maybe to consciously have those conversations on a more regular basis, because you're not having those sort of water cooler moments or catching up over a cup of tea in the staff room. So
some businesses are doing it every day. I mean, some managers every day are talking to remotely working staff just to catch up on either at the beginning of the day. So this is what your day is going to contain, and some at the end of the day.
And I think the key is to have that conversation with your employee and agree on what fits best for both for them and for the business. It depends on the sector. It depends on the individual. Might depend on the experience. Somebody who may be less experienced, new into a role, might require more and feedback, because again that's really important when you do your performance management piece, that you are giving feedback in the right way.
And new younger people coming up and learning the trade and whatever business it is, that they will know that performance management is something that will help their career develop in any event. So communicating how that's going to happen is important, so that people don't regard performance management as a threat.
No, and it shouldn't be. It should be a supportive mechanism. And I would all going back to the feedback point. don't leave it. If your performance management system only allows for a review meeting every quarter, don't allow, if something hasn't gone right with that particular employee on that particular day, make sure that feedback is given as early as possible. Don't wait for the next quarterly review. It loses its impact. It looks then as though it perhaps is something that is more threatening because you sort of kept
saved it up
until that next review date. And don't be afraid of performance management. It should be a very constructive, positive, process to take an employee through. And very often employees will want to know how they're performing, and that it doesn't have to be a lengthy review. It even just at the end of the day, saying that was a really good day. How did today go? You did that piece of work particularly well. Thanks for all your help. Very often that's all it means to keep somebody motivated, to make them aware as to how they are performing and to give them that feedback.
Yeah, I find that staff, really feed off of having praise, feedback.
Lots of organisations have team awards, and they for best performing team or employee awards and shout outs for people. That kind of thing is really motivating. Yeah,
and I think if you have got people that are either, as you say, junior, or that they need some help with their performance, to be able to see how your peers are doing as well, and having that feedback across the team can sometimes be really helpful as well.
Yeah, and it does mean that if you do need to address maybe a more serious problem, or one that's been going on for a long period of time, that actually you have been addressing it, you have been discussing it, so that if you are going down a formal route of, say, for instance, capability, that the employee isn't going to be taken aback because they have been made aware for a period of time that these issues are around.
So we're now going to move on to sexual harassment. I understand that there's a new act coming in October this year.
Yeah, there's a new act. For those who want the name of it, it's the Duty to Prevent Sexual Harassment Amendment of Equality Act 2010. So it's amending the existing legislation we have on equality. And sexual harassment is already the duty on employers to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace is already there. Employers have to ensure that there is no that they take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment between colleagues in the workplace. The new law, which is coming in, does two things. It reframes the current duty such that employers have now a duty to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. So that is going to encompass a duty that employers have to ensure not just preventing sexual harassment between colleagues. It just means anyone working for an employer has got the comfort of knowing that their employer is going to take reasonable steps to protect them against sexual harassment.
So even from customers then?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
During the time that the law was developed, there were plans to put in a duty to prevent sexual harassment by third parties.
Okay.
That was dropped during the period that the bill went through the House of Commons, and so employers perceive that as a burden on them. So that's been removed. The other point about the new law is that if anyone brings a claim in a tribunal against their employer and that they suffered sexual harassment at work, then if they win compensation, if they win their claim, there can be a 25% uplift in the compensation that's awarded if it's found that the employer didn't take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment.
That's huge.
Yeah, it is. That's a new thing. So from an HR point of view, obviously HR at work are going to have a huge role in ensuring that businesses are doing all that they can reasonably do. So Jenny, what do you think about what HR will again be looking at?
I think the advice I would be giving my clients is to make sure that it at board level is discussed, that it just doesn't sit in a policy in an employee handbook somewhere, that it is actually brought to life through board commitment or senior management commitment. I certainly think training needs to be involved.
Managers.
To look at, certainly training for managers about how to deal or prevent those situations from happening, but actually an awareness for all staff, regardless about what sexual harassment is, you know, what they should be looking for, if how they would go about making their line manager or somebody in the HR team aware of it. So that's really important. It's not just about training managers, it's about how to deal with it, but actually training all employees. So there is a good awareness in your business as to what it actually means and what.
Yeah, having reporting routes. Because sometimes people have a problem with their manager. The managers are harassing them. So it's thinking also about what would happen if that
escalating
who you could escalate to.
Yeah, and that's key, and that should be included in your policy. And sort of a developing culture where it's discussed and that it is dealt with seriously, so that an employee feels comfortable raising it if that should ever happen.
It's hard to
them.
Raise, isn't it?
It is
from our experience.
Absolutely. It's a very difficult topic, but difficult does not mean it should be avoided. It needs to be dealt with because it's the reputation of your business, you know, potential litigation if that employee were to decide to take it further. You know, and that's not the sort of environment you want your employees to be working in. You want them to be in a supportive environment, free from any form of harassment.
It's safe.
Yeah, and it includes things like social events, because we've all heard in the news reports about, you know, corporations having socials and small companies having socials and things happening, and people thinking, okay, well, I can do this because we're not actually in the office. But employers are liable generally for conduct of their staff, even in company social events.
And it's you know, in terms of timing, it's a good opportunity with the introduction of the new legislation to reinforce those types of things about your existing policy, as well as looking at what you might need to do in order to meet the requirements of the new legislation.
So anybody advising employers at the moment needs to be having as well, looking at that policy and ensuring that they're ready for October, because you all know it's coming in October. So
well, then obviously you've got Christmas parties soon after October as well, haven't you? As you mentioned about the socials.
We're moving on to our next topic, which is the fire and rehire new code of practice. I understand is coming out later this year, Elaine. Maybe you could explain a little bit more about that.
Fire and Rehire Code of Practice, a statutory code of practice, is coming into effect on the 18th of July. And this is going to be the first codification of a practice whereby employers fire people and then they wish to re-engage them on terms and conditions which are less beneficial to the employees than their previous terms and conditions. One of the most recent and high-profile cases of a large employer doing this was P&O Ferry's case, where we all heard about many of the staff who'd been employed for years who literally there's no consultation and they had their job one day and they didn't have their jobs another day. And so what the Code of Practice is doing is it's going to change the way employers can make staff aware that the change of terms and conditions is going to happen. So the code is fairly lengthy, and it provides that employers, when they first know that they're going to be making this change, they're going to have to notify ACAS and take advice from ACAS. Under the Code of Practice, there isn't much guidance on what ACAS's intervention is going to mean at that stage. But the employees, if they bring a tribunal case against their employer after this has happened to them, they will the employer would have to suffer up to a 25% uplift in compensation if they haven't informed and taken advice from ACAS. So that's a really new thing. So employers are encouraged under the code to, where they're going to be making the change to the terms and conditions and ceasing to employ people on their previous terms and conditions, they're encouraged to look at things such as notice periods, and to give people longer notice periods than are in their contract of employment, and provide support to people in terms of looking to giving them help post-employment if they are going to have to leave employment because they can't afford to carry on under a new contract with lesser terms and conditions. The employers are encouraged to help people find new jobs. So all of that is about caring for staff and not sort of rejecting them one day, taking them on the next day on better terms and conditions. Sorry, less good terms and conditions. And sometimes businesses have to cease to employ people on the same terms and conditions. There are economic circumstances which mean that they simply can't carry on employing people in the way they have been before.
But there's code of practice will ensure there's a fairer process of doing
that's
what employers
have
to
do.
follow.
That's what it's to do.
So that's it for today's session. Thank you both for joining me today. If you do have any queries regarding HR, then please contact me. My details will be up on the screen later. Cam, if they've got any recruitment questions or queries, Cam's more than happy for you to contact her. And likewise with Elaine, if you've got any queries on employment legislation or you need any advice, please contact Elaine. So thank you for joining us, and we will be doing a third session later in the autumn. If you have any particular topics you'd like us to cover, please drop us a line again on the email addresses that will be up at the end of this session. And thank you very much.